to the Food Startups Podcast, connecting the opaque world of food startups.
Hello and welcome to episode number 65. Now, we do not have a company on the show today. Instead, we are going to interview an advocacy. They're sponsored by the growers of sorghum, which is a commodity, and it's a grain that trades almost as a direct substitute for corn, but it's non-GMO, gluten-free. It can be used in a wide variety of things. In China, there's a very famous liquor that's made based on fermenting sorghum that you can find at every restaurant. I think it's called Baijiu. In the US, it's used to make ethanol. It's also livestock feed. Bob's Red Mill, Kind Bars, the famous chef Danny Meyer in New York at Gramercy Tavern, he uses the grain. It can be a flour. You can make a syrup out of it. And think of beef. It's what's for dinner. That's probably by all the cattle farmers, and they're paying an association to kind of be their lobbyist and help spread the use of it. And these guys are trying to spread the use of sorghum, not just in the US, but all over the world. So it's really, really fascinating because it's such a difficult task because logically, in terms of the environment, it doesn't use much water. Health-wise, it's non-GMO, gluten-free. It's, really high in fiber. It compares relatively well to just any other superfood grain. Yet, the name isn't sexy, sorghum, and you can't make a logical argument sometimes to change people's taste. You need emotion. So Doug has a huge challenge ahead of him, and we're going to speak with him, and he's going to tell us what they're doing for sorghum, a grain that may be a household name in the future. Stay tuned and enjoy the show. All right. He has nearly 30 years experience in business development, marketing, manufacturing, recycling of metals, and environmental compliance, as well in the bioenergy and military planning sectors. He hails from Missouri, and he's talking to me today from Missouri, just outside St. Louis. And he is also responsible today for implementing programs related to livestock nutrition and export markets for the grain known as sorghum. Now, if you haven't heard of sorghum, it's something that you'll probably hear about more moving forward. It's primarily used in the U.S. in the industrial markets, but it's also a superfood. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Douglas Bice. Doug, how's it going today?
Going great, and I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you here on the podcast.
Right, and listen, I want to relate the Sorghum Checkoff, the Sorghum Growers Association, to something that everyone knows are the famous Got Milk ads, right? That was, I'm sure, by the dairy farmers, an initiative from them to make milk more popular and a more household item.
Right.
And Doug, what got you interested in sorghum, and how long has the Sorghum Checkoff, the Sorghum Growers Association, been around?
Right. So the way the Sorghum Association quote is set up, there's two different entities. There's the National Sorghum Producers. Well, they've been around for several decades. Then they saw a need, it had been in 2008 when the United Sorghum Checkoff came into evolution. And the Checkoff program is designed for marketing, research, promotion, things of that nature to, quote, support a commodity. So there's checkoffs for all kinds of different commodities throughout the U.S. Some are called boards, the dairy board, for example, the pork board. In our case, we're a sorghum checkoff. So we're farmer-funded. Farmers pay a fee based on a small percentage of what they, quote, produce for sorghum. And in the case of sorghum, keep in mind, it's actually even more than just the grain. Sorghum is also known, there's actually 4 classes of sorghum. If you want to look at it from a taxonomy perspective, genus, species. There's a biomass sorghum, there's a sweet sorghum, there's a forage sorghum, and then there's the more popular grain sorghum. And each of those have their specific applications. Now, for me, in my personal background, I worked in the bioenergy, the biofuels world, and so sweet and biomass sorghums were of great interest to us. It was a very easy crop to grow in some pretty harsh conditions. Didn't take a lot of TLC, if you will, and as such, produced a very good fuel source, a very good thermal energy, if you will, when we converted it to a fuel source from its starch components. So from a BTU value perspective, it was wonderful. So that's how I first was introduced to sorghum. And then more and more we got involved in the grain side as well for livestock feed and things of that nature. So for me, it was a nice transition coming on over, working with the Checkoff, which is just a really good group. We're a small group. There's about 22 of us that work, maybe not quite that many, excuse me. That's 22 combined for the NSP, the sorghum producers, and then the Sorghum Checkoff. We're headquartered down in Lubbock, Texas, but we have a number of folks, myself included, that branch out and work on different areas. Some are regional focused, some are specific crop focused, and in my case, I'm more market focused. That's my area where we're trying to develop the non-traditional uses of sorghum.
So,
food.
Doug, let's define those non-traditional uses.
Right. So we've got the human food, we have pet food, we have specialty chemicals, we have alcohols and spirits, things of that nature. Those are really, the industrial chemicals, as I mentioned, those are really the unique areas that really just haven't been broached yet and have, in some cases in the area of human food, been forgotten as a key nutritional food source. So,
sorry to interrupt you. So I want to clarify something.
Yeah.
So it's been forgotten as a food source over the last 30 years or so. Why has sorghum fallen out of favor as, at least in the U.S., I know in
Right.
Africa and India, they consume at a much higher rate, but why has it fallen out of favor
Right.
as a food source?
Well, there was a couple dynamics that took place here in the 1980s in the U.S. One was Farm Bill. If you look at the provisions within the 1985 Farm Bill, there was a big incentive program put out by the federal government to convert a lot of field areas into conservation, resource program areas, CRP acres, if you will. And bottom line is, instead of planting your crops there, folks, let's go natural, let's let it go wild, let's, quote, conserve more of our farmland, just because at that time we could do that, and we'll pay you, some form of subsidy to manage your land in that manner. So that was one. The other was the breakthrough of, Roundup Ready crops for corn that was implemented and made farming life much easier, because you were able to reduce the amount of applications. Genetically, it was changed with corn that they could have that embedded into the grain itself, and that basically took off.
And Doug, just
really
to clarify
became
here,
a
you're talking about
tremendous growing
the GMOs. So basically, corn. The reason that corn didn't fall off was because of a GMO seed, right? A genetically modified seed that
Right.
And that made it way easier for farmers, more attractive to grow instead of sorghum.
Absolutely. And, to this day, sorghum is not genetically modified. There's not any commercial basis or reasoning for us to do that. So, yeah, and again, there you go. Now today you have over 14 billion bushels of corn that are grown in the United States, and we're way below 1 billion bushels. We're around 500 to 600 million bushels. So that's been a big difference. But those are the two reasons, when you ask about the historical context, that I would tell you that's not so much that sorghum fell out of favor as much as the crops became, much more appealing based on the ease and ability to grow them agriculturally.
And listeners, I'm going to link to the nutrition facts for sorghum, but it's gluten-free, it's non-GMO, high in fiber. The outside that you would cook with it, which would be included in like Bob's Red Mill, et cetera, et cetera. It's really, really high in antioxidant. I mean, it compares very favorably to quinoa and any of the other like hot, quote unquote, hot grains right now. So it's really interesting. And Doug, I know you guys are going to advertise with Southwest Airlines, and I found you guys via an advertisement for the Natural Products Expo, which is coming up here in just over a week. Tell me, what's the goal? Who is the target market for this Southwest Airlines ad?
Well, the ad did go out in both July and August. We did full-page color ads, two separate type of ads. We have, on the August ad, for example, we have several well-known, renowned nutritionists, dietitians speaking on our behalf. They've been, quote, working with sorghum. They understand fully the nutritional benefits and are speaking for us. And, it's wonderful to have spokespersons like that. The target audience, you can look at it in different ways. One is there is a general awareness campaign. We're back into, again, trying to play catch up and remind folks of the benefits of sorghum from a health perspective, because it is a key source of all those things that you mentioned from a protein and fiber and micronutrient perspective, without question. And the point is, if you look at our slogan on there, it says, ancient grain, American grown. Well, think about it. For those who are very much into the ancient grain movement, sorghum qualifies as an ancient grain the same way as quinoa, teff, amaranth, right? Well, here's the difference. And it's got a very comparable nutrition profile. Some areas it's better, some it's not. But the point is I don't have to, quote, go across the sea or leave the country to go get the grain and bring it back to the United States. I've got it in my own backyard. It's grown throughout all of the Midwest and to some extent on the East Coast. Well, why spend that extra money to bring in a food source that's going to take care of you here in your own backyard? So we always want to stress ancient grain, American grown, from that perspective. For all the benefits that we see with ancient and whole grain, we definitely want to make sure that folks don't forget about sorghum. From a cost perspective, it's so comparable. It's actually a better deal for those that are in the distribution cycle to take care of sorghum here, bring it in as a food source, as opposed to having to ship it and export it into the country or import it into the U.S. That's key.
So, Doug, listen, okay, so it's really interesting to me that you guys are focusing on the health part and going for human consumption, especially in the U.S. And I guess that has to do with the diversity for the farmers, right? Because I know it's used as ethanol. It's way more water efficient. It uses less water, right? But the farmers can get a better price if it's considered a superfood. Is that correct?
Yeah, and again, the term superfood, obviously that's a subjective term that, different folks use, but clearly, and we have, if you go to our website, especially under the pet food section, we have a presentation made by Dr. Greg Aldridge from Kansas State University, and he does a wonderful job making the case for sorghum as a superfood. So I'm going to use that as an aside. But the point clearly is, we know it has tremendous value for the livestock industry. And yes, that's cattle, that's dairy, it's beef, it's swine, it's poultry. But guess what? We've seen the amino acid profile is so beneficial for those, animals and feeding them. Guess what? While different digestive systems, different biologies, physiologies, it still works for human as well as pet in different ways as well. But those benefits that we've learned about and gleaned from the livestock industry, for example, available phosphorus. That's one of the great benefits here that you find with sorghum that you don't have with other grains. Well, wonderful for us as well. Wonderful for our pets as well. Those are things that we learned from the livestock industry that we're now bringing over into the consumer market industry, as well as, again, micronutrients. We see a lot. The other benefit I think I'd like to put out there for the audience so that they understand is the complementary nature of sorghum, in that it works well with so many other food sources. Okay, let's say you want something that's higher in protein, that's fine, but lacks in micronutrients. Well, you bring it together with sorghum, and we see that now in a lot of our food aid projects. So we have a sorghum soy, we have a sorghum cowpea blend that we're using to feed, quote, malnourished children. Over in Africa, we're doing studies over there in Tanzania. And so that complementary nature of sorghum can't be forgotten either. It doesn't have to necessarily be a sole source. Bring it in with another food source that mills properly. It can be processed in the same way. That's the other benefit. It's so diverse, it can be used as a bran, as a flake, as a puff, as a kibble, as a whole grain, as pearlized, as a syrup. There's so many different ways it can be processed. That's the other part, the flexibility of sorghum used in the food source that makes it so nice, where some other grains can't be processed. We see extrusion processes that are utilized quite well with sorghum.
And Doug, define extrusion.
Yeah, so you're basically bringing in opposing, I don't want to call them throttle spindles, whatever term I guess I should be using here, that are basically pushing together and compacting that grain into a specific, real dense type material. So these competing screws, opposite opposing screws, there's single and then there's double extrusion screws. But bottom line is you're bringing in that grain, it's being crushed, it's being densified, if you will, taking out excess moisture and things of that nature that aren't needed, and bring it into a form that can then be used in many different food applications. And again, here especially in the pet food side, you see most of the pet foods that are produced that way, that produce these kibbles, they come from an extrusion process, something that's really compacted them. And that's wonderful because you then, again, keep everything together. All the good stuff that you want, you're densifying. All the stuff that you don't want is pushed out with excess moisture and water. And so that's a nice way to, from a food processing perspective, that sorghum can be utilized that some others can't be. Not all, but some others can't be. So again, back to the flexibility of food processing, sorghum is perfect. It's great. It works just so well.
So Doug, listen, so there's no doubt about it, like from a logical argument, that there's tons and tons of benefits for human consumption as well as, pet food consumption. But as you probably know, having experience in marketing, it's very rare that logical arguments have effect in terms of getting the word out there. And you mentioned, American grown, and maybe you could use the word superfood and stuff. I mean, like what do you think about the emotional appeal? How do you create an emotional appeal with sorghum?
Yeah, great question. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is appeal to those groups that we already know have, sensitivity, if you will, to certain aspects. Again, the gluten-free market, that's an emotional discussion. It's an emotional debate. But those that seek it out, we're here. We clearly are a gluten-free option. Same with the GMO option. Whichever side of the argument you're on, the point is, here we are. We're available for you in that aspect. And so we clearly do outreach in those two areas as well. But some of the key components, though, and the American grown does have an appeal for many folks. Some of it's patriotic, but I'd like to think, again, your logic component, if you know it's here for you and it's already grown in your own backyard, odds are the costs are going to be better off for you. So that should be a logical correlation that many people should pick up on. The other appeals, though, are back to its ease of use. And if you see the pictures, for example, we have a lot of the recipes on our website. That visual appeal of sorghum. I was just in a recipe contest last week. We had 28 different sorghum dishes. The visual appeal of sorghum is quite compelling, too, because of its ability to blend in so well with so many other types of dishes. But again, first and foremost is the health movement. Kind Bars now has two different varieties. They just implemented sorghum into the latest two varieties, as I'm understanding. And there's a health component there. We're in a number of energy bars. So that's the other group that we're focusing on there for the health kick. And, I'm glad it's happening, because when you look at obesity, when you look at, diabetic conditions and things of that nature, we definitely have to have alternatives that are easy to use, cost-effective, and taste good.
I think that's interesting that you guys are with Kind and with other energy bars, because as a grain, you can buy like the Bob's Red Mill, like the red sorghum and cook it, but it's not direct. But when it's in an energy bar, you don't have to do anything and say, hey, this has sorghum in it. I think that's a great way to expose people to the food. Not that, boiling something in water for, 20 to 40 minutes is difficult, but that makes it even easier. You got to make it as easy as possible to introduce people to sorghum. So that's really exciting that you guys are in a brand like Kind, right? And I want to move on to exports, because you mentioned something really interesting to me, that Mexico was the leading importer of U.S. sorghum until 2013, and then came the China pull. Tell us about what's going on in China.
Well, China's in a situation where, again, when you look at it from what I'll call a simple geographic perspective, you lay a map of China over the United States and they're almost equivalent insofar as land mass. However, China has 5 times the population basically that the U.S. has. So with that, they have greater challenges with respect to feeding their population. So, that's really their first hurdle to get through. What they're going through right now is a nice transition to modernize their agricultural industry, and they're doing it deliberatively. They're doing it in a very methodical process. And as such, to make this transition to go higher tech in the ag field, they have to, support the historical family farm before they can make such transitions. So with this natural transition, you're seeing the need for increased imports into China, exports from U.S. And clearly the grain market is that big driver. You are now seeing China's meat consumption has grown phenomenally because they're becoming much more advanced. If you've been to Beijing and Shanghai, it's phenomenal. It's just wonderful what those cities look like now. I hadn't been there in 15 years, and I've been there twice now this past year, and they've really advanced. Well, when you have an advanced population like that, clearly meat consumption goes along with it. There's a nice correlation. To do that, you have to take care of the livestock, and to take care of the livestock, you have to provide grain. Now, keeping in mind, China is not geographically designed to be, because of its significant mountain ranges, it doesn't have as much arable or viable agriculture acres as the United States does. So again, same land mass, less farmland, less yields, lower soil conditions, and I still have to feed 5 times my population that we have here. So to do that, the import markets have really been a boom as of late, last few years for China. And sorghum has ridden that wave. And right now, China's, importing roughly 15 million metric tons. Could be more for this coming year. We're expecting it to be. But, of course, grains. That's what they're bringing in. So to do that, sorghum is one of those options. And, China has basically put a premium on sorghum because of its performance, because of its ability to do so many things for their livestock, especially in the swine industry. That's their big driver, is swine, and then next is poultry. And sorghum matches up so well with swine feed milling operations that they just love it. And we hear that firsthand from them across the table. We're asking them specifically, what are the benefits? Why do you like it? And they'll tick off all these reasons of it. It's for meat quality, less waste, more available phosphorus, a great amino acid profile. I don't have to put in as many additives because sorghum is taking care of the nutrient needs of our swine. We have better digestibility with our sows, things of that nature. So when you're hearing that directly from them, you're doing something right, and they've caught on to this such that the inclusion rates for sorghum now in the feed mixes, the feed formulations, have gone from 10 and 15% to now 30 to 50%. That's significant. And when you're feeding millions of swine, that has a direct impact on the amount of grain that's needed.
Wow. And Doug, listen, I really am enjoying this because you know so much about it. I know you're more on the marketing side, but sometimes you find in marketing sales, people don't have a deep understanding of the product. That's definitely not the case with you. So kudos for that. I have a question that I'm pretty interested in. How much do you guys spend on marketing and advertising per year? What's your budget for 2015?
Well, again, we're not a large-scale checkoff program. We're very small compared to the other, like I said, the bigger boards, the ones that have been around for many decades. So, for us, a few $1 million, and that's on research, marketing, promotional opportunities. That's how we look at our dollars. A couple $1 million probably every year towards those types of activities.
So you guys have to be really creative and efficient with what you guys do. You don't have $100 million or something to spend. So that's really interesting.
That's exactly right. So our challenge is, how do we, with a small budget at this stage, make the biggest bang for the buck? And what we're doing is we're going to all those that we can go to, the conferences and exhibit. We're making presentations in front of specific audiences on the culinary side, the food service sector side, Department of Defense, supermarket RDs, anybody that we can get in front of, we're making our case and making our pitch in front of them.
Is the Department of Defense for the military to consume sorghum for its health benefits? Or
yeah, with groups like Department of Defense, obviously you have multiple branches of service there, and they all deal with food service in different ways. And so what you try to do is, make your case, and then, we do scaled recipes. And if you look again on our recipe section of our website, we have all these scaled recipes, anywhere from 25 to 100 person servings. For that very reason, because whether they're at a garrison or whether they're mobile or whatever, they need to have these recipes ready to go and ready to be developed for mass feeding. So that's what we've done. We've taken it from the dinner table and we brought it up to the mass scale recipes. And for that very reason, you're trying to get into their recipe catalogs, such that groups like Cisco, Sodexo, and others will look at it and say, oh my gosh, we want this nutrient value for this particular group, and therefore we're going to bring sorghum in from the catalog and incorporate it as part of the meal.
I love that. I love that you guys have mass recipes, because it shows that you guys are really thinking about that, like selling to food service, and not just, you have those as well, recipes for, one person or a family of 4. That's fantastic. Right. That's fantastic. So it seems like you guys are really utilizing a lot of angles here. Now, going back to like kind bars and everything, are you guys going to be at Expo East coming up?
I don't think I have that on my schedule. I just, there's only so much of me and, our staff that can make it. So I would love to. We did at least look at it initially, but we made our decisions based on where we knew we were going to have the best exposure, for sorghum. But we do have consideration for Expo East, Expo West next year. There's all kinds of, again, it's just being spread way too thin. Other than that, I definitely would love to be there. There's just not enough to make it and resources to do. We've done 5 shows. We'll be doing at the end of October, we will have 5 shows where we've had a very strong presence, and that's what we were able to afford this year with our budget.
That's fantastic. Now, Doug, tell me a little bit about your day-to-day. How many days a week do you travel per month?
Yeah, for me, it's crazy. The travel, I think I went 4 weeks in a row there where I was home maybe a total of 3 days because we were doing all these different shows and we were doing some international travel with the export markets. So there is no true day-to-day. It's simply a matter of where you're trying to meet the, different groups. It could be with a livestock group here, one day we could be traveling, across the sea to go meet folks from export market traders and groups like that. The next week, you're at an expo show. Another week, you were at meeting with farmers and producers. So another day, you're maybe down at a port talking with folks on logistics. So it's really hard to say there's a day-to-day, which for me is great. I love the variety and the flexibility of doing all these different things. But, those are the kind of things that we deal with in high-value markets, and you have to meet people where they are, and trying to find out what their needs are and how we can help incorporate, sorghum into some of their thinking. Again, you don't have to dominate everything. You don't have to be the number one. It's just put us in there in consideration. Promote that agriculturally, too. We try to also impress upon farmers and producers that, it doesn't have to be, a corn or corn soybean. Rotate in sorghum every so often. If it's every third year for pest control, for things of that nature, for soil conditioning, there are times when it just makes sense to bring sorghum in. And we're seeing a lot more of that crop rotation. So that from a land management and input cost perspective is really helping farmers. So we're trying to impress upon them things of that nature as well, along with the end product usage on how we can, again, have sorghum as a complementary food source or pet food source in addition to the agricultural benefits of it.
I find this so interesting because there's just so many uses. And going back to the growers, right, it kind of reminds me of hemp where there's so many uses for hemp and, it has its own history with being a cousin of marijuana, but it can make paper. I know Mercedes doors are made out of fiberglass out of hemp. It's just one of those other incredible versatile crops. I wanted to finish on something because I've seen this on the website. Every time I go to preparing for this interview to the sorghumgrowers.com, you have this, I don't know if it's a slogan, but a line that says, we're in DC, we are in DC, so you don't have to be. And is this lobbying? What do you guys do in Washington, DC?
So that when you're on Sorghum Growers, again, that's the National Sorghum Producers, and that group is an advocacy group. And yes, they're involved in legislative, regulatory, lobbying efforts. Again, I'm on the Checkoff side, so if you go to sorghumcheckoff.com, that's where you'll see all of our marketing, research, promotion. So 2 different groups that function 2 different ways with, 2 different jurisdictions of, oversight, if you will. We do obviously report to the USDA, governmental entity, but again, 2 different functionality groups.
But you guys,
so
you guys know each other, right? And work together.
Oh, absolutely. We all work together in different ways, but clearly those that are with the sorghum producers, they have their own objectives that they have to meet. We as Checkoff have our own, and there's certain things that we are not allowed to do. We're not allowed to do any lobbying. I'm not allowed to, form any kind of advocacy in any way, shape, or form. And guess what? I don't want to do that. I've done enough of that in my prior career that, I just don't need that part of it. I'd rather be on what I'll call the fun side, and that is, again, marketing and promoting high-quality commodity that is, there's nowhere to go but up for us. And that's what I like to do.
So question, I'm curious. So lobbying, what are some of the things that maybe for you, lobbying's not a great fit? What were some of the things that you've done in the past that you said, you know what, I don't think I want to spend my time doing this?
Well, it's just the bureaucracy and the headbutting and the dollars that are spent on legal fees are what are so disappointing. that I don't see how they make any progress at all in Washington, D.C. It's so bureaucratic. And again, you have so many different interest groups. I mean, you can have one movement, they're talking about U.S. waterways, for example, here recently, and, redefinition of U.S. waterways. Well, you're going to have a gazillion different interest groups that are going to file suits, file claims, that are going to it just draws it out. And even the best intended regulations sometimes just get so muddied, and you have to have so many amendments, addendums. It takes away from the initial intent because you're so worried about satisfying special interest groups. And everybody has their own lobbying, and I understand it's important to do, but it's hard to make progress, and it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So for me, that was kind of what I'll call the downside of it. It just really drains you.
Well, you really put it really well and succinctly, right? So, Doug, it seems like what you're doing, it's a commodity. It's a very versatile commodity. It's a healthy commodity. Yep. It's non-GMO, which is important. So you're basically trying to get people to use it and promote awareness for it. And it seems a lot more straightforward and way less. Not that I'm sure there's still some red tape, just like any type of food involvement. But it
we
seems
still
like
have to get approvals. Yeah, it's much less. It's much easier to deal with this world and the approvals that we have to go through, as opposed to legislative and regulatory efforts, which take typically years to incorporate.
Great. Well, listen, Doug, I learned so much today. I'm still trying to learn more about sorghum, and, I've cooked with it before with the Bob's Red Mill. And what else can I say? Thank you so much for coming on. I think the listeners learned a lot. Some of us, people have reached out to me on the show. I'm working with a particular fruit that we're trying to promote awareness for in the U.S. that's not very well known, called the goldenberry. And so the challenge of getting awareness out it's hard. It's really hard. And it's really cool what you guys are doing, and please keep us up to date with your progress.
Absolutely. And, the other thing I'd like to throw out there for you and the listeners is that, i.e., like a goldenberry, things where, again, I go back to the complementary nature. One of the things that I learned from this recipe contest, the number one, the big winner for our recipe contest was this nice granola. It was mixed in with a lot of neat little fruits and berries, and then they had the sorghum in there. And boy, it was such a well-blended taste. And so, as we go into this, again, I go back to and say, you don't have to be the number one dog, in the yard. You can be complementary. You can work with others, and where those situations are available, we should be teaming up with others to make a better product. Whether it's a cereal, we're big time on the Special K. We now have the gluten-free. We have multigrain Cheerios. We're in all these big-time products. Well, guess what? It's blends of unique things to make this great taste. And so I want to put that out for everybody to think about. If there's interest on their end, check it out. Look me up, seek me out, and see if we can make some complementary partnerships work.
Fantastic. What a great offer. All right. Well, thank you so much, Doug, and great job.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.